Welcome back to another story on Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Foundation of Trust. James Serrano had built his life on precision and control. At 42, he owned Serrano Construction, a company that had transformed the skyline of 3 counties with its signature steel and glass towers. His calloused hands could read blueprints like scripture, and his steel-gray eyes missed nothing on a job site. Workers respected him not just for his success, but for the quiet intensity that suggested crossing him would be a mistake. 20 years ago, he'd married Laura Leonard, a stunning redhead with emerald eyes who worked as a wedding planner. She'd been the daughter of the town's former police chief, Leonard, a man who died a hero's death in a gang shootout when Laura was just 18. James had fallen for her vulnerability, her need for protection, and her dreams of creating perfect moments for others. Their early years had been golden. James built their dream home on 10 acres outside town, a modern fortress with panoramic windows, a workshop larger than most houses, and a wine cellar that doubled as a safe room. Laura's business, Forever Moments, became the premier wedding planning service in the region. They seemed untouchable, but success breeds complacency, and complacency breeds blindness. The first crack appeared 6 months ago when James noticed Laura working later hours, taking calls in private, and being unusually protective of her phone. When he'd asked about it, she'd smiled that same radiant smile that had captured his heart and explained she was planning a celebrity wedding that required absolute discretion. "Trust me, honey," she'd said, running her fingers through his dark hair. "This contract will set us up for life." James had trusted her. Trust was the foundation of everything he'd built. The second crack came when he discovered she'd taken out a second mortgage on their home without telling him. When confronted, Laura had tears in her eyes as she explained that the celebrity client had required a substantial upfront investment for exclusive vendors. She'd handled it quietly to surprise him with the success. "I wanted to prove I could build something as impressive as your construction empire," she'd whispered against his chest. Again, James had trusted her. But this time, he'd begun watching. What he saw over the next weeks chilled him. Late-night texts that made her smile in ways she hadn't smiled at him in years. Phone calls where she'd lower her voice and step onto the balcony. Credit card statements showing expensive dinners at restaurants they'd never visited together. The third crack became a chasm when he hired a private investigator, Marvin Grimes, a former cop who specialized in matrimonial cases. The photos Marvin delivered were clinical and devastating. Laura entering a downtown hotel with Salvador Patton, a smooth-talking real estate developer who'd been circling James's more successful projects like a vulture for years. Salvador was everything James wasn't. Flashy where James was solid, charming where James was direct, and apparently irresistible where James had become predictable. The photos showed intimate dinners, weekend getaways, and worst of all, passionate embraces in hotel rooms that James's hard work had unknowingly funded. But James hadn't acted immediately. He was a planner, a builder who understood that lasting structures required solid foundations. If he was going to tear down his marriage, he needed to understand every support beam and weak point first. He'd spent weeks documenting everything. Bank records, phone logs, hotel receipts, and even recordings from listening devices he'd planted in Laura's car and office. The evidence painted a picture of a woman who'd been living a double life for over 8 months, funding her affair with their joint assets while planning to leave him for a man who promised her a lifestyle James's steady success couldn't match. The irony wasn't lost on him. Laura had been planning the destruction of their marriage with the same meticulous attention to detail she brought to her clients' wedding celebrations. The betrayal was as carefully orchestrated as any project James had ever managed. That's when he'd made his decision. If Laura wanted to destroy their marriage, he'd give her exactly what she wanted, but on his terms and with consequences she'd never imagined. James Serrano had built his reputation on delivering projects ahead of schedule and under budget. This project will be no different. Chapter 2. The Perfect Storm. The revelation of Laura's betrayal had transformed James from a trusting husband into something far more dangerous, a man with nothing left to lose and every resource at his disposal to exact justice. But before he could implement his plan, fate handed him an opportunity he couldn't have scripted better himself. It began with a phone call on a rain-soaked Thursday evening. Laura had been working late again, which James now knew meant she was at Salvador's penthouse apartment. The caller was Ethel Blackburn, Laura's mother, a bitter woman who'd never forgiven the world for taking her husband and had spent the last 24 years making everyone around her pay for her grief. "James, darling." Ethel's voice dripped with false sweetness through the phone. "I need to speak with you about something important. Can you come by tonight?" Ethel lived in the old Leonard family home, a Victorian monster on the wrong side of town that she'd let decay around her like her own spirit. When James arrived, he found her in the parlor, surrounded by her collection of porcelain dolls and newspaper clippings about her dead husband's heroics. "Sit down, James," she commanded, pouring herself another glass of gin. "We need to discuss Laura's future." "What about her future?" Ethel's laugh was sharp as broken glass. "Oh, don't play dumb with me. You think I don't know about Salvador? About their plans?" James kept his expression neutral, but internally his mind raced. "What plans?" "The wedding, you fool. They're planning to get married next month. A destination wedding in the Bahamas. Very romantic, very expensive." Ethel's eyes glittered with malicious satisfaction. "Laura's been using your money to fund the entire affair, including Salvador's gambling debts." This was new information. James had known about the affair, but not about immediate marriage plans or Salvador's financial problems. "How do you know this?" "Because she asked me to sell my house to help fund their new life together." Can you imagine? Asking me to give up the last piece of her father's memory so she can run off with some smooth-talking con man. Ethel leaned forward, her gin-soaked breath washing over James. "But here's what she doesn't know. I've done my own research on Mr. Salvador Patton." Ethel produced a manila folder thick with documents. "Your wife's boyfriend isn't just a real estate developer, James. He's a professional con man who specializes in targeting successful men's wives. You're not his first victim, and you won't be his last unless someone stops him." James flipped through the documents. Police reports from 3 other states, bankruptcy filings, and testimonials from other men who'd lost their wives and fortunes to Salvador's schemes. The pattern was always the same. Charm the wife, drain the joint assets, disappear after a quickie wedding, leaving both the original husband and the victimized wife broke and heartbroken. "Why are you telling me this?" James asked. Ethel's smile was pure venom. "Because Laura is about to destroy herself, and I want front row seats. But more importantly, I want Salvador Patton to pay for thinking he could use a Leonard woman as a disposable pawn in his games." That night, James sat in his workshop, surrounded by the tools of his trade, and formulated a plan that would make Salvador's previous cons look like child's play. If Salvador wanted to play games with other people's lives, James would teach him the rules of a much deadlier game. The first phase involved using Salvador's own greed against him. James began leaking information through construction industry contacts about a massive development project, a $50 million resort complex that required a specific type of real estate expertise. The bait was irresistible: quick profits, minimal oversight, and the kind of prestige project that would establish Salvador as a major player in the region. James made sure Salvador learned that Serrano Construction was the prime contractor and that the developer was actively seeking a real estate partner with Salvador's specific qualifications. The hook was set when James arranged for Salvador to accidentally encounter him at the country club bar. "Serrano." Salvador's voice boomed across the mahogany-paneled room. "Just the man I wanted to see. I hear you're working on something big." James looked up from his whiskey, his expression carefully neutral. "Salvador, I heard you and Laura were getting serious. Congratulations." Salvador's smile faltered for just a moment. Clearly, he hadn't expected James to know about their relationship. "Well, yes, we've been seeing each other. Laura's an amazing woman." "She is," James agreed. "Which is why I hope you'll treat her better than you treated Margaret Walsh in Denver or Susan Rodriguez in Phoenix." The color drained from Salvador's face. "I don't know what you're talking about." James stood, placing a 20 on the bar. Of course you don't. Just like you don't know anything about the oceanfront development project. Good luck with that, Salvador. I'm sure it'll work out exactly like your other ventures. As James walked away, he could feel Salvador's eyes burning into his back. The seeds of paranoia were planted. Now Salvador would spend sleepless nights wondering what James knew and what he was planning to do with that knowledge. But the real beauty of James's plan wasn't in what Salvador thought he knew. It was in what Salvador would do when his desperation peaked. Chapter 3. The Hammer Falls. 2 weeks later, Salvador's desperation had reached its crescendo. James's carefully orchestrated campaign of psychological warfare had worked perfectly. Through intermediaries and anonymous tips, he'd ensured that Salvador's creditors knew about his location. His gambling debts were called in early, and his few legitimate business deals began falling through due to routine background checks that revealed his previous schemes. Salvador was drowning, and Laura was his only lifeline to the money he needed to escape the closing net. But their planned wedding in the Bahamas required immediate access to substantial cash that was tied up in James's assets and couldn't be accessed without his cooperation or death. The plan Salvador and Laura hatched was desperate and sloppy, born from panic rather than careful consideration. They would stage a home invasion gone wrong, with Salvador playing the role of the hero who tried to save James but arrived too late. Laura would inherit everything. They'd liquidate the assets quickly and disappear to a non-extradition country before anyone could investigate too closely. What they didn't know was that James had anticipated this exact scenario. His home security system didn't just record video. It transmitted everything in real time to multiple secure servers. More importantly, he'd spent the last week preparing for their inevitable move. The attack came on a Saturday morning when Laura knew James would be alone in his workshop. She'd sent the housekeeping staff away early and made sure his usual Saturday golf game was canceled due to family obligations. Salvador entered through the side door that Laura had left unlocked, carrying a carpenter's hammer from James's own tool collection. James was ready. When Salvador crept into the workshop, he found James apparently absorbed in reviewing blueprints at his drafting table. Salvador raised the hammer, aiming for the killing blow that would solve all his problems. James moved at the last second. The hammer crashed into the drafting table instead of his skull, but Salvador's follow-up swing caught James across the temple, sending him sprawling to the concrete floor. Blood poured from the gash, and James's vision blurred as Salvador raised the hammer for another strike. "You should have just signed the papers when she asked," Salvador panted, his face twisted with desperate rage. "Should have made this easy." James rolled away from the next swing, his hand closing around a box cutter he'd strategically placed near the workbench. As Salvador brought the hammer down again, James swept the blade across his attacker's Achilles tendon. Salvador's scream echoed through the workshop as he collapsed, the hammer clattering across the floor. James struggled to his feet, blood streaming down his face, and looked down at the man who tried to kill him for money and a woman who'd already betrayed them both. "My wife's new boyfriend just shattered my skull with a hammer," James said into his phone, his voice deadly calm despite the blood loss. "I was half conscious, tried to call the ambulance." But before he could complete the call, Laura burst into the workshop. Her face was a mask of panic as she saw Salvador writhing on the floor and James standing over him with the phone. She snatched the phone from his bloodied hands. "It's just a scratch. You'll ruin our wedding plans." James stared at his wife, the woman he'd loved for 20 years, the woman he'd built a life with, the woman who'd just revealed that her primary concern wasn't his injury or even her lover's condition, but protecting their escape plan. At that moment, Ethel appeared in the doorway, drawn by Salvador's screams. She took in the scene with cold satisfaction before looking at her injured son-in-law. "Stop being such a crybaby weakling, James," she sneered. "Men have survived worse than a little bump on the head." James felt something inside him break. Not his skull, which throbbed with pain, but something deeper and more fundamental. The last vestige of the man who believed in trust and family and the bonds that held civilization together. They had no idea what he would do next. James looked at Salvador, still bleeding on his workshop floor. He looked at Laura, clutching the phone like it was her ticket to freedom. He looked at Ethel, whose bitter smile suggested she was enjoying the chaos she'd helped create. And then James smiled back, a cold, terrible expression that would haunt their nightmares for however long they had left to dream. "You're right," he said quietly, taking the phone back from Laura's suddenly nerveless fingers. "It is just a scratch." He ended the emergency call and turned off the phone completely. But attempted murder isn't. Chapter 4. The Architect of Ruin. 3 hours later, James sat in the emergency room as a doctor stitched the gash in his scalp. The official story was that he'd been injured in a workshop accident, a story that Salvador and Laura were only too eager to support once they understood the alternative James was offering. "Here's how this is going to work," James had explained to them as Salvador's bleeding slowly stopped with makeshift bandages. "You have 2 choices. Option 1. I call the police, show them the security footage of Salvador breaking in and attacking me with a hammer, and you both spend the next 20 years in prison. Option 2. You play along with my workshop accident story, and I let you live long enough to regret ever meeting each other." The choice had been easy for them. What they didn't understand was that James's mercy was not kindness. It was a much more elaborate form of justice. While the doctor worked on his stitches, James used his tablet to monitor the first phase of his real plan. His construction company employed some of the most skilled tradesmen in the state, men who owed their livelihoods to James's success and their loyalty to his fair treatment over the years. More importantly, several of them had backgrounds that made them uniquely qualified for specialized projects. Mickey Boyd had been a demolitions expert in the Army before joining Serrano Construction. Dean Anderson was a master electrician who'd worked black operations for a government contractor that didn't officially exist. Ronnie Keller had been a locksmith before discovering his talent for carpentry, and his old skills remained sharp. By the time James returned home that evening, his team had already begun their work. The security cameras had been upgraded with additional features that would record everything but only transmit what James wanted the outside world to see. The house's electrical system had been modified in ways that would be invisible to casual inspection but would give James complete control over every light, lock, and appliance. Most importantly, the foundation of his home had been subtly altered. What appeared to be minor earthquake retrofitting was actually the installation of a sophisticated containment system. James's wine cellar, already designed as a safe room, had been expanded into something far more versatile. "How's the head?" Laura asked when he entered their bedroom. She was packing a suitcase with shaking hands, her earlier bravado replaced by a fear she couldn't quite understand. "It'll heal," James replied, watching her fold clothes with the desperate efficiency of someone planning to run. "Where are you going?" I thought maybe I should stay with my mother for a few days. While you recover." James nodded thoughtfully. "That's probably best. Give us both some time to think about our future." Laura's relief was palpable. She kissed his cheek, a gesture that felt like betrayal masquerading as affection, and hurried downstairs with her luggage. James watched from the window as she loaded her car and drove away, probably to comfort Salvador and plan their next move. They still thought they were playing the same game they'd always played: manipulation, seduction, and financial exploitation. They had no idea that James had changed the rules entirely. That night, James sat in his workshop, no longer surrounded by the tools of construction, but by the instruments of a much more precise craft. On his computer screen were detailed floor plans, not of buildings he intended to create, but of spaces he intended to control absolutely. The basement of the old Leonard house where Ethel lived was about to undergo some renovations. The penthouse apartment where Salvador had been staying was due for some electrical work, and the storage facility where Laura kept her business inventory needed some structural improvements. Each location would become a stage in an elaborate performance that would teach his betrayers the true meaning of powerlessness. They'd taken his trust, his money, and his safety. Now he would take their freedom, their hope, and finally, their lives, but not before they understood exactly what they'd lost and what they'd never had. James pulled up the security footage from that morning, watching Salvador creep through his home with murder in his eyes. He studied Laura's face as she snatched the phone, prioritizing their escape over his life. He replayed Ethel's sneer as she called him a weakling. By dawn, he had their fates planned down to the minute. The game was no longer about money or marriage or even justice. It was about showing three people who'd underestimated him exactly what a master builder could construct when he set his mind to creating hell on earth. Chapter 5. The Trap Springs. Salvador Patton discovered the first sign that his world was collapsing when he tried to access his offshore accounts the next morning. Every password had been changed, every security question had been altered, and every attempt to contact customer service resulted in automated messages claiming his accounts were under investigation for suspicious activity. The second sign came when he arrived at his penthouse to find the building's management waiting for him with an eviction notice. Apparently, his lease had been purchased by an unnamed corporation, and his residency was being terminated due to violations of the building's moral conduct clauses. The third sign was when Laura called him, sobbing hysterically. "Salvador, something's wrong. My mother won't answer her phone, and when I went to her house, all the locks have been changed. There's a notice on the door saying the property is under renovation by court order." Salvador's hands trembled as he held the phone. "Court order? What court order?" "I don't know. The notice says all inquiries should be directed to Serrano Construction, but that can't be right. James wouldn't. He couldn't." Laura's voice trailed off as the implications hit her. But James could, and he had. Using his connections in the construction industry and the local government, James had maneuvered all the pieces into position. Ethel's house had been declared a health hazard due to structural problems that had been mysteriously discovered during a routine inspection. Salvador's building had been sold to a shell company that James controlled through a network of business partnerships. And Laura's storage facility had been condemned due to electrical violations that hadn't existed the day before. The beautiful simplicity of it was that everything was completely legal. James hadn't broken any laws. He'd simply used his knowledge of building codes, zoning regulations, and municipal procedures to systematically dismantle their lives within the framework of legitimate bureaucracy. By noon, Salvador and Laura were homeless, penniless, and completely dependent on James's mercy for even the most basic necessities. Their bank accounts had been frozen, pending investigation into suspicious money transfers. Their credit cards had been canceled due to non-payment of debts that had suddenly appeared on their records. Even their cell phones had been disconnected for failure to pay bills that had been mysteriously redirected to addresses that didn't exist. James turned to look at her, and for a moment, she saw a flicker of the man she'd married. The man who'd loved her, protected her, built a life around her happiness. Then the flicker died, replaced by something cold and implacable. "Laura, 24 hours ago, you watched a man try to murder me with a hammer, and your primary concern was protecting your wedding plans. 8 hours ago, you were in a hotel room with that same man, planning how to liquidate my assets after my funeral. 2 hours ago, you called me crying for help with problems you created through your own betrayal." He walked back to his desk and pressed another button. The monitors shifted to show recorded conversations. Laura and Salvador planning the attack, discussing which assets would be easiest to convert to cash, even joking about how long they'd have to wait before it would be appropriate for the grieving widow to remarry. "This is who you are," James continued. "This is who you've always been. I just finally have clear vision." The trailer fell silent except for the hum of electronic equipment and the distant sound of construction machinery working through the night shift. Somewhere in that darkness, James's crew was building something that would serve purposes Salvador and Laura couldn't yet imagine. "Your education begins tomorrow," James announced. "Salvador, you'll report to the construction site at 6 a.m. Laura, you'll be relocating to specialized accommodations where you can reflect on the choices that brought you here." "What if we refuse?" Salvador asked, though his voice suggested he already knew the answer. James gestured toward the monitor showing the men outside. "Then your education will be much shorter and considerably more painful." As if on cue, the locks disengaged and the trailer door opened. The three men in suits stepped inside, their expressions professionally neutral, but their intent unmistakable. "These gentlemen will escort you to your new accommodations," James said. I suggest you use the time to consider how much you value the privileges you've taken for granted. Things like privacy, comfort, dignity, and hope. As Salvador and Laura were led away into the night, James returned his attention to the blueprints on his wall. Phase 1 of their education was complete. They now understood that their old lives were gone forever and that their survival depended entirely on his mercy. Phase 2 would teach them that mercy was not something he was inclined to provide. Chapter 7. The Classroom of Consequence. Salvador's first day as a laborer began at 4:30 a.m. in a windowless room that had once been a storage closet, but now served as his living quarters. The space was exactly 6 feet by 8 feet, large enough to contain a narrow cot, a bucket that served multiple purposes, and nothing else. The walls were concrete, the door was steel, and the single light bulb was controlled by someone else. When the door opened at 6 a.m. sharp, Salvador was escorted by Mickey Boyd, James's demolitions expert who traded his military fatigue for work clothes but retained the bearing of a man comfortable with violence. "Morning, sunshine," Mickey said with a grin that didn't reach his eyes. "Time to earn your keep." The construction site where Salvador would spend his days was a masterpiece of psychological architecture. James had designed it to be simultaneously a legitimate renovation project and an elaborate torture device that left no marks but broke spirits with mechanical precision. Salvador's first task was simple. Move a pile of concrete blocks from one side of the site to the other, stack them precisely according to a diagram, then move them back when the specifications changed. The blocks weighed 50 pounds each, and there were 200 of them. The work had to be completed by lunch, or there would be no lunch. Meanwhile, 3 miles away, Laura was beginning her own education in a space that had once been the basement of her mother's house. James's renovation had transformed it into something that resembled a luxury hotel room. If luxury hotels were designed by people who understood that comfort could be a weapon more effective than pain. The room was beautiful. Hardwood floors, expensive furniture, ambient lighting, and a view through one-way glass that showed her the garden where she'd played as a child. Everything she needed was provided. Gourmet meals delivered through a slot, designer clothes in her exact size, even books and magazines for entertainment. The psychological torture was in the perfection itself. She was living in luxury while knowing that every comfort was a gift from the man she'd betrayed, provided at his whim and revocable at his pleasure. The one-way glass meant she could see out, but knew she was being watched constantly. The beautiful room was still a cage, and the golden bars were somehow more degrading than iron ones would have been. On the third day, James visited her. He entered through a door she hadn't even known existed, blending seamlessly with the wall's wood paneling. He looked impeccable in a tailored suit, every inch the successful businessman she'd married, while she sat in silk pajamas that felt like a costume in her own prison. "How are you adjusting to your new accommodations?" he asked politely, as if inquiring about a hotel stay. Laura had spent 72 hours alternating between rage, despair, and bargaining with a god she wasn't sure was listening. Now, faced with James's clinical politeness, she felt something break inside her chest. "What do you want from me?" she whispered. James sat down across from her in a chair that hadn't been there moments before, another reminder that he controlled every aspect of her environment. "I want you to understand what you did," he said simply. "Not just the affair, not just the theft, but the fundamental violation of trust that made those things possible." He placed a tablet on the coffee table between them. The screen showed security footage from their home over the past 8 months. Her secret phone calls, her lies about working late, her stealing documents from his office to learn about his assets. "You see, Laura, I could forgive the affair. People fall out of love, marriages end, hearts change. I could even forgive the money. It's just paper, and I can always make more." The footage shifted to show her helping Salvador case their home, pointing out the location of safes, discussing James's routines, even suggesting the best time and method for the attack. "But this," James continued, his voice never rising above conversational level, "this is unforgivable. You didn't just stop loving me, Laura. You started planning my death." Laura tried to speak, but James held up a hand. "I'm not interested in excuses or explanations. I'm interested in education. Do you know what happened to your mother? The question hit Laura like a physical blow. Where is she? Is she alive? She's safe, James replied. She's living in a very comfortable facility that specializes in caring for people who've had psychological breaks. The shock of learning about your plans for my murder was quite traumatic for her, particularly when she realized that your inheritance would have included selling her childhood home to fund your escape. Laura stared at him in horror. You told her? They met at a diner on the outskirts of town, two people who'd thought they were predators discovering they'd been prey all along. This is impossible, Salvador muttered, stirring sugar into coffee he couldn't afford. No one person could coordinate all of this. Laura stared out the window at the construction crew working on a new shopping center across the street. The Serrano Construction logo was prominently displayed on every vehicle and piece of equipment. You don't know my husband, she whispered. When James builds something, it stays built. When he tears something down, she didn't finish the sentence. Their phones rang simultaneously, cheap prepaid devices that had been delivered to the diner with a note instructing them to answer immediately. James's voice was calm and conversational, as if he were discussing weekend plans rather than the systematic destruction of their lives. I hope you're enjoying your lunch. The coffee at Martha's Diner isn't great, but it's all you can afford now. I wanted to give you an update on your current situation. Salvador gripped the phone so tightly his knuckles went white. You son of a bitch, what have you done? I've given you exactly what you wanted, Salvador. Freedom from your previous obligations. Of course, freedom comes with certain costs, as you're discovering. James, Laura interrupted, her voice breaking. Please, we can work this out. We can fix this. James's laughter was soft and terrible. Fix what, Laura? Your affair? Your theft? Your attempt to have me murdered? Which part exactly do you think can be fixed? The silence stretched between them like a chasm. Here's what's going to happen, James continued. In 1 hour, you'll receive instructions on where to go. You'll follow those instructions exactly, or your current problems will seem like minor inconveniences compared to what comes next. Don't try to run. I own this town's infrastructure now, and there's nowhere you can hide that I won't find you. The line went dead. Salvador and Laura sat in stunned silence, the magnitude of their situation finally becoming clear. They'd thought they were executing a simple con, but they'd stumbled into a trap so elaborate and comprehensive that escape was impossible. 1 hour later, the instructions arrived, an address on the industrial side of town with a single line of additional text. Come alone, but come together. The education you've been lacking is about to begin. As they drove through the darkening streets toward an uncertain fate, neither Salvador nor Laura spoke. There was nothing left to say. They betrayed a man who built his life on precision and control, and now they were about to learn what happens when that precision and control are turned toward destruction. The address led them to a construction site surrounded by high fences and security cameras. The gate stood open, and floodlights illuminated a path leading to a trailer that served as the site office. They had no choice but to follow the path James had built for them, leading to a reckoning that would make their worst nightmares seem like pleasant dreams. Chapter 6. The Foundation of Fear. The construction trailer that Salvador and Laura entered was not what they expected. Instead of the typical chaos of a worksite office, they found themselves in a meticulously organized space that resembled a command center more than a temporary building. Multiple monitors displayed camera feeds from locations they recognized. Ethel's house, Salvador's former penthouse, Laura's business office, along with feeds from places they didn't recognize but suspected they would soon become familiar with. James sat behind a desk made from a massive slab of steel and concrete, a physical representation of the industry that had built his fortune and was now funding their destruction. His head wound was hidden beneath a dark bandage, but his gray eyes were clear and focused with an intensity that made both visitors instinctively step backward. Sit, he commanded, gesturing to two metal folding chairs positioned precisely 6 feet from his desk. When they hesitated, the lights in the trailer dimmed and the door locks engaged with an audible click. The message was clear. They would sit voluntarily, or they would be made to understand that their voluntary cooperation was the only illusion of control they had left. Let me explain your situation, James began, his voice carrying the same matter-of-fact tone he used when discussing construction schedules. Salvador, your gambling debts now total approximately $200,000, thanks to some recent investments I've made in your creditors' patience. The people you owe money to are no longer the civilized casino managers you're used to dealing with. They're considerably more direct in their collection methods. Salvador's face paled. You can't just. I can, and I have. James touched a button on his desk, and one of the monitors displayed a feed from outside the trailer. 3 large men in expensive suits stood next to a black sedan, clearly visible in the floodlights. They're waiting for my instructions. I can tell them you're not ready to discuss payment, or I can tell them you're ready to work off your debt in ways that don't require money. The threat hung in the air like smoke from a fire that had already consumed everything around it. James turned his attention to Laura. As for you, my dear wife, your situation is somewhat more complex. You see, when you forged my signature on those loan documents, you technically committed bank fraud. When you used our joint accounts to fund your affair, you committed theft. When you helped plan my murder, you became an accessory to attempted homicide. Laura's voice was barely a whisper. What do you want from us? James smiled, and the expression was more terrifying than any show of anger would have been. I want you to understand what you've lost. Both of you have spent your lives taking things that didn't belong to you. Money, trust, love, lives. You've never experienced being on the receiving end of that equation. He stood and walked to a wall-mounted blueprint that showed detailed construction plans. This is a restoration project I'm working on. It involves converting an old industrial building into a specialized training facility. The work requires very specific skills and absolute attention to detail. Salvador found his voice. What kind of training facility? The kind that teaches people the value of the things they've taken for granted. James traced a finger along the blueprint, following lines that showed a complex network of rooms, corridors, and what appear to be observation areas. You'll both be participating in this project, Salvador as a laborer, Laura as a subject study. The clinical detachment in his voice was more frightening than any emotional outburst could have been. James, please, Laura tried again. I know I made mistakes, but we can fix this. We can go back to the way things were. Laura looked up from the book she'd been pretending to read. A romance novel about true love conquering all obstacles, which James had selected with deliberate irony. The good news is that her psychological condition has stabilized. The bad news is that the stabilization involves a complete rejection of the daughter who betrayed everything she believed about family and love. He opened the folder and removed a single sheet of paper, a legal document written in formal language but clear in its intent. She's legally disowned you, Laura. Changed her will, revoked your power of attorney, and formally requested that you never contact her again. She's also provided testimony to the district attorney regarding your confession to her about planning my murder. Laura's hands shook as she read the document. Her mother's signature at the bottom was firm and clear, with none of the trembling uncertainty of age. This was a decision made with complete conviction. She wanted me to give you a message, James continued. She said to tell you that she raised a daughter to honor the Leonard family name. But that daughter died the day you chose money over marriage vows. The paper fell from Laura's nerveless fingers. Of course, James added, his tone becoming almost conversational, none of this has to be permanent. Family relationships can be rebuilt, trust can be restored, and people can find their way back to each other. Laura looked up with desperate hope. The process just requires complete honesty about past mistakes and genuine commitment to making amends. James's smile was gentle and terrible. Are you ready to begin that process, Laura? She nodded frantically, willing to agree to anything that might offer a path back to the life she destroyed. Excellent. We'll start tomorrow. As James left her alone with the ruins of her family relationships, Laura finally understood that her education was entering its final phase, the one where she would learn that some betrayals are too complete for forgiveness, and some bridges once burned, can never be rebuilt. Chapter 9. The Final Blueprint. 6 months later, James sat in his office overlooking the completed Riverside Rehabilitation Center, watching the sunrise paint the mountains in shades of gold and crimson. The facility was now operational, funded through a combination of government grants, private donations, and the liquidated assets of people who'd learned too late that actions have consequences. Salvador had become patient zero in the center's betrayal trauma treatment program. After 4 months of viewing testimonies from his victims, writing response letters, and participating in group therapy with other perpetrators, something fundamental had broken inside him. He now spent his days in productive catatonia, weaving baskets with mechanical precision while muttering apologies to people who weren't in the room. The psychiatrist called it a breakthrough. James called it justice. Salvador's gambling debts had been paid off through an innovative work release program that involved construction projects in countries that didn't ask many questions about worker safety or overtime regulations. He would never again have the opportunity to seduce vulnerable women or destroy trusting marriages, but he would live, in a manner of speaking, for many years to come. Laura's rehabilitation had taken a different path entirely. James entered her beautiful prison that morning to find her exactly where he'd left her the day before, sitting in the chair by the window, staring at the garden beyond the one-way glass with the hollow expression of someone who'd finally understood the magnitude of what they'd lost. "Good morning," James said, settling into his usual chair with the folder that contained her daily lesson. She didn't respond. She rarely spoke anymore. Not since the day 3 months ago when James had played her the recording of her mother's final message. The one where Ethel explained in precise, devastating detail why her daughter was dead to her and always would be. Today's lesson concerns the concept of redemption. James began, opening the folder to reveal photographs and documents. The question we're exploring is whether someone who's betrayed a sacred trust can ever truly make amends. The photographs showed scenes from the life Laura had destroyed, their wedding day, vacations they'd taken together, quiet moments of happiness captured when she'd still been capable of genuine emotion. Mixed among them were more recent images. James alone at charitable functions where they'd once appeared together, the empty space beside him in church where she used to sit, the dinner table set for one. "I've been giving this question considerable thought," James continued, "and I've reached some interesting conclusions." He placed a new document on the table between them, a death certificate bearing Laura's name and yesterday's date. According to the state records, Laura Leonard Serrano died in a single-car accident on Highway 15. The police report indicates she was driving erratically, possibly under the influence of grief over her husband's recent murder by her boyfriend. Very tragic, very final. Laura's eyes focused for the first time in weeks, staring at the certificate with growing horror. The woman sitting in this chair is now Alice Walton, a patient at our facility who suffered from severe dissociative identity disorder brought on by witnessing her husband's murder. She has no memory of her previous life, no family to claim her, and no legal identity beyond her patient records. James's voice remained calm and clinical as he explained the architecture of her new existence. Alice will live here for the rest of her natural life, receiving excellent care and treatment for her condition. She'll be comfortable, safe, and well-fed. She'll also be completely isolated from the outside world, with no visitors, no phone calls, and no mail except what the medical staff deems therapeutically appropriate. The beautiful room suddenly felt smaller, its luxury transformed into the appointments of a tomb. I showed her the recordings, the documents, the bank records. Your mother spent 24 years mourning a hero and dreaming of the day her daughter would find the kind of man worthy of the Leonard name. James's smile was sharp as winter sunlight. Learning that her daughter had become an accessory to murder was educational for her as well. The cruelty of it took Laura's breath away. James hadn't just imprisoned her. He destroyed her mother's faith in her, probably permanently. "You're a monster," she breathed. James considered this seriously. "Perhaps, but I'm a monster you created, Laura. Every lie you told, every dollar you stole, every moment you spent planning my death. You are building the man sitting across from you now." He stood to leave, then paused at the hidden door. "Salvador is learning about the value of honest work. Your mother is learning about the consequences of raising a child without moral boundaries. And you're learning about the luxury of safety and comfort, luxuries you were willing to take away from me permanently. The door sealed behind him, leaving Laura alone with the tablet and the footage of her own betrayal playing on an endless loop. Outside, James walked through the night air toward the construction site, where Salvador was discovering that 12-hour days of backbreaking labor were easier to endure than 12-hour nights of sleepless anticipation for the next day's suffering. The education of his betrayers was proceeding exactly according to plan. Chapter 8. The Weight of Revelation. 2 weeks into their re-education, Salvador had lost 15 pounds and developed calluses that would never fully heal, while Laura had gained a thorough understanding of how quickly luxury could become torture when seasoned with helplessness. But James's true lesson was just beginning. On a Tuesday morning that started like all the others, Salvador was midway through his daily task, digging foundation trenches with hand tools because the mechanical equipment was mysteriously always broken, when Mickey Boyd approached with an unusually grim expression. "Boss wants to see you," Mickey said. "Clean up first. You're going somewhere that requires better hygiene than this place." An hour later, Salvador sat in the back of a van with tinted windows, his wrists secured with zip ties and his ankles chained to the floor. The ride took 45 minutes, leading through parts of the state he'd never seen before, until they arrived at what appeared to be a private medical facility nestled in rolling hills far from any main roads. James was waiting in the lobby, dressed in a doctor's white coat that fit him perfectly and carried an ID badge identifying him as Dr. Serrano, Chief of Psychiatric Research. "Welcome to the Riverside Rehabilitation Center," James said pleasantly. "This facility specializes in treating patients who've suffered severe psychological trauma, often as a result of betrayal by trusted loved ones." Salvador was led through corridors lined with rooms where patients sat in various states of catatonic withdrawal. Some stared at walls, others rocked back and forth, and a few mumbled to themselves about trust and promises and the way people they'd loved had destroyed their lives. Each of these patients was recommended to our care by family members who felt traditional therapy wasn't sufficient for their conditions, James explained as they walked. "We specialize in helping people understand the long-term consequences of betrayal trauma." They stopped outside a room with a large observation window. Inside, a middle-aged woman sat motionless in a chair, staring at a wedding photo held in hands that trembled constantly. "Margaret Walsh," James said. "She was one of your earlier victims, Salvador. Her husband brought her here after she suffered a complete psychological breakdown following your disappearance with their life savings." Salvador's blood turned to ice water. The next room contained a younger man who'd arranged toy soldiers in precise formations on a table, only to knock them down and start over again in an endless cycle. "Robert Chun. His wife followed your playbook exactly. The affair, the financial theft, the staged disappearance. He was found 3 days later in his garage with the car running and a note apologizing for not being man enough to keep his wife happy." James's voice remained clinical and detached as they moved to the next room. "We saved him, of course, but as you can see, the recovery process is ongoing." Room after room revealed the hidden casualties of Salvador's career. Broken spouses, traumatized children, elderly parents who'd lost their homes and their faith in their children's love. The facility housed dozens of people whose lives had been collateral damage and Con Salvador had never looked back to examine. "The beauty of your operation," James continued, "was that you always moved on before seeing the real consequences. You got to enjoy the money and the excitement of the seduction without witnessing the suicides, the breakdowns, or the families torn apart by the revelation that love could be purchased and discarded like any other commodity." They entered a conference room where Salvador was seated at a table across from a panel of 3 individuals: a psychiatrist, a social worker, and someone identified only as a patient advocate. "Mr. Patton," the psychiatrist began, "we've brought you here to participate in a new treatment protocol we're developing. It's based on the theory that perpetrators of betrayal trauma can be rehabilitated through direct exposure to the consequences of their actions." A projector screen descended from the ceiling, and Salvador found himself watching video testimony from his victims, people he barely remembered, but who remembered him with crystalline clarity. They spoke about the dreams that had been destroyed, the trust that had been shattered, and the way his betrayal had poisoned every relationship they'd attempted since. The treatment requires you to observe these testimonies for 8 hours a day, the social worker explained. You'll then be asked to write detailed responses to each victim, explaining your understanding of how your actions affected their lives. And if I refuse? Salvador asked, though his voice had lost all its former confidence. The patient advocate smiled with the kind of professional warmth that radiated from predators disguised as caregivers. Oh, participation is entirely voluntary. Of course, your debt to our funding partners requires some form of payment, and manual labor was the only alternative arrangement we could negotiate. Salvador looked through the conference room window at the construction site visible in the distance, where prisoners in orange jumpsuits were breaking rocks under the supervision of guards with automatic weapons. I understand, he whispered. While Salvador was discovering the true cost of his career choices, Laura was receiving a visitor of her own. James entered her beautiful prison, carrying a manila folder and wearing an expression that somehow managed to be both sympathetic and merciless. I have news about your mother, he said, settling into the chair across from her. Is this redemption? James asked philosophically. Alice gets to live, which is more mercy than she showed me when she helped plan my murder. She gets comfort and safety, which is more than her victims usually receive. And she gets time, years and years of time, to reflect on the choices that led her here. He stood to leave, then paused at the hidden door. Of course, if Alice ever recovers her memory enough to remember who she used to be, the staff will interpret that as a psychological crisis requiring immediate intervention. We've found that electroconvulsive therapy is very effective at helping patients let go of traumatic memories. The door sealed behind him with the soft finality of a coffin lid closing. James walked through the facility's corridors, past rooms filled with people learning that betrayal was a luxury they could no longer afford. Some were genuine patients who'd been damaged by the Salvador Pattons of the world. Others were former predators undergoing the kind of rehabilitation that ensured they'd never hurt anyone again. The beauty of the system was its perfect justice. Everyone received exactly what they'd given others. Betrayers learned about trust, thieves learned about loss, and people who destroyed families discovered what it felt like to have their own identities dissolved completely. In his office, James reviewed the final reports from his legal team. The estate of James Serrano had been settled efficiently, with the surviving husband receiving everything according to the will they'd filed probate court. There had been no challenges to the inheritance, no suspicious inquiries, and no loose ends requiring attention. As far as the world knew, James was a widower who'd lost his wife in a tragic accident shortly after surviving a murder attempt by her lover. He'd channeled his grief into philanthropic work, funding mental health facilities for trauma victims and supporting legislation aimed at protecting families from financial predators. He was, by all accounts, a pillar of the community and an inspiration to other survivors of betrayal. James opened his desk drawer and removed a photograph. Himself and Laura on their wedding day, young and happy and still believing that love was enough to protect them from the world's cruelties. He studied her face in the picture, radiant with joy that had seemed genuine at the time, but now felt like the first lie in a relationship built on deception. For a moment, he almost felt something that might have been regret. Then he remembered the hammer falling toward his skull, his wife snatching the phone to protect her escape plan, and Ethel calling him a weakling for bleeding from an attempted murder. James closed the drawer and returned his attention to the construction plans for his next project. There were other predators in the world, other families being destroyed by people who thought they were too clever to face consequences for their actions. The Riverside Rehabilitation Center was just the beginning. After all, James Serrano had built his reputation on delivering projects ahead of schedule and under budget. And he had so much more to build. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there. Hello and welcome back to Infidelity Tales Lab. We're grateful for each view and comment. Tell us, from which country or city are you watching today? We enjoy connecting with our global audience. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. Variable Inputs. Phoenix Mills was not born to privilege. Growing up in rural Nevada with a mechanic father and waitress mother, he learned early that intelligence was his only path forward. By 14, he taught himself 5 programming languages. By 20, he developed his first security algorithm that caught the attention of venture capitalists. Now at 34, he sat in the sleek conference room of QuantumLock, the cybersecurity startup he'd built from nothing. The neural mapping security system they developed was revolutionary. It could predict intrusion attempts before they happened by analyzing behavioral patterns. Major tech companies were circling like sharks. The Gartner Group is offering $50 million, said Phoenix's business partner, Wes Donovan, sliding the offer across the glass table. Phoenix nodded, expressionless. And Firewall Technologies? 70, but with more strings attached. Phoenix's fingers drummed against the table. Tell them both we're still considering options. What neither offer accounted for was the personal cost. 10 years of 18-hour days. A receding social life. A marriage that had become increasingly hollow. Phoenix had met Naomi Fremont at a tech conference in San Francisco. She was beautiful, cultured, and seemed genuinely fascinated by his work. Their courtship was a whirlwind. Expensive dinners, weekend getaways, passionate nights. 6 months later, they were married in an intimate ceremony at Lake Tahoe. The first few years were good. Naomi supported him through the struggling startup phase, or so he thought. She managed their social calendar, hosted dinner parties for potential investors, created the illusion of success before it materialized. As he drove home that evening, Phoenix's mind was calculating variables, potential exit strategies, ways to maximize QuantumLock's value before selling. He pulled into the driveway of their modernist home in the hills overlooking the city, noticing 3 unfamiliar cars parked outside. Naomi had mentioned something about hosting her college friends. Phoenix preferred to avoid these gatherings. Force small talk with people who barely masked their disinterest in anything beyond superficial conversation. He entered silently through the side door that led directly to his home office, intending to work until her friends departed. As he settled at his desk, voices drifted through the air, vent connecting to the living room. "So how much longer do you have to play the doting wife?" asked a female voice Phoenix didn't recognize. Naomi's laugh, a sound once precious to him, cut through the air. "Until the ink dries on the acquisition. My attorney says California's community property laws are on my side." "And Phoenix has no idea?" another voice asked. "Please. He's brilliant with code, but clueless with people. He actually thinks I enjoy hearing about neural security networks over dinner." Phoenix sat motionless, the words hitting him like physical blows. "What about Theo?" someone asked. "Theo understands the situation," Naomi replied. "We've been patient. Once I get my half of the company's sale, we'll have more than enough to start over somewhere new. Malibu, maybe. Or Lake Como. But what if Phoenix doesn't sell?" "He will. Wes has been pushing for it, and Phoenix trusts him completely. Besides, I've made sure to mention how we could finally start living once he cashes out." The conversation shifted to vacation plans, but Phoenix had heard enough. He sat in the darkened office, perfectly still, as something inside him crystallized into cold, hard resolve. Naomi wasn't the only variable in his calculations anymore. Now, she was the problem he needed to solve. Chapter 2. System Analysis. The next morning, Phoenix maintained his routine with mechanical precision. He kissed Naomi goodbye, told her he loved her, and drove to the office as though his world hadn't imploded. At QuantumLock, he nodded to the receptionist and walked directly to the server room. The one place he knew was free from surveillance cameras. There, he called Brooks Alderman, an attorney who had represented him in the early days of the company. "I need to meet. Today. And no one can know." 3 hours later, Phoenix sat in a private room at an out-of-the-way diner 50 miles outside the city. A post-nuptial agreement? Brooks raised an eyebrow. After 5 years of marriage? She'll be suspicious. Not if it's framed correctly, Phoenix replied. We're about to sell the company. I'll tell her it's about protecting both of us from potential liability issues post-sale. And the real purpose? I want clauses that specifically address infidelity, conspiracy to defraud, and premeditated divorce for financial gain. Brooks leaned back. You're going to need evidence. I'll get it, Phoenix said with certainty. I need this ironclad, Brooks. When I'm done, I want her to have nothing. Over the next week, Phoenix operated on 2 distinct tracks. Publicly, he was the same focused tech CEO, weighing acquisition offers and running his company. Privately, he became an intelligence gatherer. He hired a private investigator named Merritt who specialized in digital forensics. Within days, she provided Phoenix with a comprehensive file. Naomi had reconnected with Theo Lancaster 3 years ago, a former boyfriend who now worked for Pinnacle Investments, one of the venture capital firms interested in acquiring Quantum Lock. The text messages were damning. They detailed not just an affair, but a calculated plan to maximize Naomi's divorce settlement once the company sold. Theo had been feeding her information about potential acquisition values, coaching her on when to file for divorce. Your wife's boyfriend has a conflict of interest that would tank the acquisition if it came to light, Merritt explained. He's been sharing confidential Pinnacle information with her. Phoenix nodded, absorbing this information with eerie calm. What about Wes? Merritt hesitated. Your business partner has been communicating with Theo as well, though more sporadically. It seems he's been promised a position at Pinnacle post-acquisition. 2 betrayals. His wife and his best friend since college. That night, Phoenix installed microscopic recording devices throughout their home, technology developed by Quantum Lock, but never brought to market due to privacy concerns. For the next 3 weeks, Phoenix gathered evidence, analyzed patterns, and formulated his response. He studied Naomi like she was a security threat, mapping her routines, communications, and vulnerabilities. He discovered that Theo visited their home whenever Phoenix traveled for business. He learned that Naomi had opened a separate bank account. He found that she'd consulted 3 different divorce attorneys over the past year, searching for the one who promised the largest settlement. While Naomi plotted, Phoenix revised. With Brooks's guidance, he created a new post-nuptial agreement that appeared standard but contained carefully worded clauses that would activate under specific conditions. This won't be easy to get her to sign, Brooks warned. Leave that to me, Phoenix replied. Chapter 3. Code Execution. Phoenix chose a Friday evening after a particularly promising meeting with Firewall Technologies. He brought home champagne and takeout from Naomi's favorite restaurant. I think we should celebrate, he announced, entering the kitchen where Naomi was texting with Theo, he now knew. Naomi quickly put down her phone, her smile shifting into place with practiced ease. Did something happen with the acquisition? Firewall increased their offer to $90 million. We're getting close, Naomi. Everything we've worked for is about to pay off. The gleam in her eyes was unmistakable. That's incredible, Phoenix. As they ate, Phoenix carefully laid the groundwork. The attorneys want us to update some paperwork before the sale goes through. Standard liability protection. What kind of paperwork? Naomi asked, pouring her 3rd glass of champagne. Just an updated post-nup. The company's value has changed dramatically since we got married. It protects both of us. Naomi's fork paused halfway to her mouth. Why would I need protection? If something went wrong with the product after the sale, plaintiff's attorneys could come after our personal assets. This ensures they can only touch the business proceeds, not what we build afterward. Phoenix watched her calculate behind her eyes. If she refused, she'd appear suspicious. If she agreed, she thought she was still protected by California law. I suppose that makes sense, she said finally. When do they need it? I have the paperwork here. We could sign tonight, and I'll file it Monday. Phoenix presented the documents, walking her through each section with practiced casualness. The key provisions were buried in legal terminology that seemed to address post-sale liability, but actually created ironclad penalties for infidelity and conspiracy. Naomi signed without reading carefully, her mind already spending the millions she thought would soon be hers. Monday morning, Phoenix filed the revised post-nuptial agreement. That afternoon, he called a board meeting. "I've been considering our acquisition options," he told the assembled board members and Wes. "I believe we're at the point where a decision needs to be made." Wes leaned forward eagerly. "I agree. Pinnacle's offer. I'm recommending we go with Firewall Technologies," Phoenix interrupted. "They're offering $95 million with fewer restrictions." "But Pinnacle," Wes began, "has a conflict of interest that I've recently discovered," Phoenix finished. He slid folders across the table to each board member. "These contain evidence that Theodore Lancaster of Pinnacle has been inappropriately sharing confidential information and has a personal relationship that compromises his professional judgment." The board members flipped through the documents with increasing concern. "In light of this," Phoenix continued, "I move that we accept Firewall's offer, contingent on accelerated payment terms. I believe we can close within 30 days. The vote was unanimous, with a stunned Wes abstaining. The next 4 weeks were a blur of due diligence meetings, contract negotiations, and strategic planning. Phoenix worked methodically, laying groundwork for what would come after the sale. He liquidated certain personal investments and moved the funds to offshore accounts. He purchased a new property under a shell company. He retained a new legal team specialized in high-conflict divorce. The day Firewall transferred $95 million to Quantum Lock's accounts, Phoenix received a share as CEO and founder, $42 million after taxes. By evening, the funds were secured in accounts that would be difficult to trace or access without his explicit authorization. As predicted, Naomi filed for divorce the following morning. "Mr. Mills," his assistant said, entering his office with an envelope. "These just arrived for you." Phoenix opened the envelope, finding divorce papers. He allowed himself the smallest smile. The algorithm was running exactly as designed. Chapter 4. Unexpected Output. Naomi's divorce filing made the front page of the business section. The timing was too perfect to ignore. CEO sells company for millions. Wife files for divorce the next day. It painted a picture even the most disinterested observer could understand. Phoenix issued no comment, but his PR team released a brief statement. "Mr. Mills is focusing on the successful transition of Quantum Lock to its new owners and asked for privacy during this personal matter." Privately, Phoenix moved with the precision of a chess grandmaster. He contacted Brooks immediately. "She's using Draymond Klein," Brooks said, referring to Naomi's attorney. "He's aggressive, media-hungry, and has a reputation for scorched earth tactics." "Perfect," Phoenix replied. "Perfect? Phoenix, he's going to try to destroy you. Let him try. The more aggressive they are, the more justified my defense will appear." The first salvo came 3 days later. Naomi's legal team filed for temporary spousal support of $200,000 monthly, claiming she maintained the household and social connections instrumental to Quantum Lock's success and deserved equal share of the marital assets. Phoenix's team responded by simply asking for more time to evaluate the request. The delay strategy served two purposes. It allowed his evidence gathering to continue, and it frustrated Naomi, who had already begun spending as though the money was guaranteed. 2 weeks after the divorce filing, Phoenix arranged to collect some personal items from their home. Naomi had moved into a luxury condo downtown, already leased in her name months before the divorce filing, Phoenix discovered. As he packed books from his office, he heard the front door open. Instead of Naomi, Theo Lancaster walked in, using a key. "What the hell are you doing here?" Theo demanded, stopping short when he saw Phoenix. Phoenix turned slowly. "Interesting question from someone who doesn't live here. Naomi gave me a key. She asked me to check on the place." "How thoughtful of her," Phoenix replied, continuing to pack his books. "And how long have you been checking on my wife, Theo?" 3 years. 4. The color drained from Theo's face. "I don't know what you're talking about." "No? Should I play the recordings from this house?" Or perhaps the ones from the Quantum Lock server room where you and Wes discussed your plans for after the acquisition. Theo stepped forward. You're bluffing. That's illegal surveillance. Is it? I developed that technology. I own the patents. I was testing security equipment in my home and office. If conversations were captured, Phoenix shrugged. Unfortunate, but inadmissible, as you say. What do you want? Theo asked finally. Nothing from you. You're just a secondary character in this story. But you might want to warn Naomi that her strategy isn't going to work out as planned. After Theo left, Phoenix placed one final recording device in the living room, the most powerful one yet. Then he sent a text to Naomi, left some financial documents on the dining room table. You might want to review them before our hearing next week. The documents were bank statements that appear to show accounts Phoenix had forgotten to secure. In reality, these accounts contained modest sums meant to distract from his actual assets. That night, the new recording device captured Naomi and Theo in the living room. He knows about us, Theo said, pacing. So what? California's a no-fault state. It doesn't matter if I slept with the entire Lakers team. I still get half. He mentioned recordings, Naomi, of us, of me and Wes. Bullshit. He's trying to scare us. What if he's not? What if he has evidence of us planning this? Of me sharing Pinnacle's information? Then your career is over, Naomi said coldly. But that doesn't change the fact that I'm entitled to half of everything acquired during our marriage, including $42 million from Quantum Lock. Their conversation continued, detailing every aspect of their plan, their relationship timeline, and their expectations for the divorce settlement. Phoenix had his smoking gun. At the temporary support hearing the following week, Klein painted Phoenix as a calculating tech mogul hiding assets from his devoted wife. Mrs. Mills supported her husband through years of startup struggles, Klein argued. She's entitled to maintain her lifestyle while we determine equitable distribution of marital assets. Assets that conveniently disappeared offshore within hours of the company's sale. Phoenix's attorneys requested a continuance, claiming they needed time to prepare a complete financial disclosure. The judge granted 2 more weeks. During those 2 weeks, Phoenix's team filed their bombshell motion. They contested the validity of the divorce filing itself based on fraud, submitted the postnuptial agreement signed 2 months earlier, and requested an emergency hearing. The day before the emergency hearing, Phoenix sent Naomi a text, settlement meeting tomorrow. You might want to bring Theo. Chapter 5, Virus Detected. The conference room in Brooks Alderman's law offices was deliberately intimidating. Dark wood, leather chairs, and a table long enough to create significant distance between the opposing sides. Naomi arrived with Klein and, surprisingly, Theo. Phoenix sat with Brooks and 2 other attorneys, his expression unreadable. Before we begin, Klein started, I want to object to Mr. Lancaster's presence being requested. He has no standing in these proceedings. On the contrary, Brooks replied, Mr. Lancaster's presence is central to our motion. You'll understand shortly. Klein's eyes narrowed. This better not be a delay tactic. No delays, Phoenix said quietly. In fact, I'm hoping we can resolve everything today. Brooks opened a leather portfolio. 2 days after Quantum Lock sale, Mrs. Mills filed for divorce, claiming irreconcilable differences and seeking half of all marital assets, including Mr. Mills' proceeds from the company's sale, which she's entitled to under California law. Klein interjected. Ordinarily, yes, Brooks agreed. However, 2 months ago, both parties signed this postnuptial agreement. He slid copies across the table. Klein skimmed the document. This appears to address liability protection, not divorce terms. Page 6, Section 4, Brooks directed. The agreement specifically addresses divorce under certain conditions. Klein flipped to the indicated section, his expression darkening as he read. Section 4.3, Brooks read aloud. In the event either party engages in infidelity, conspiracy to defraud the other party, or files for divorce as part of a premeditated plan to acquire assets, said party forfeits all rights to marital property and business interests acquired during the marriage. Klein's laugh was dismissive. You can't seriously expect to enforce this. It's buried in technical language about liability protection. Mrs. Mills wasn't properly informed about these provisions. Mrs. Mills had the opportunity to read what she signed, Brooks replied. More importantly, we have evidence that these exact conditions have been met. Brooks nodded to an assistant who set up a laptop and speakers. This is a recording from the Mills residence, taken 3 nights ago. The playback began. Naomi and Theo's voices filled the room, discussing their 3-year affair, their coordination with Wes, and their explicit plan to wait until after the company's sale to file for divorce. "This is inadmissible," Klein shouted. "Illegal surveillance." Actually, Brooks countered, Mr. Mills was testing quantum lock security products in his home, with disclosure posted at all entrances as required by law. The capturing of these conversations was incidental. Klein turned to Naomi, whose face had gone pale. "Did you see any disclosure notices?" "They were small signs. I thought they were from the security system." Brooks continued inexorably. "We also have 3 years of text messages between Mrs. Mills and Mr. Lancaster detailing their affair and financial conspiracy, plus communications between Mr. Lancaster and Wesley Donovan regarding Pinnacle's acquisition strategy." "This is character assassination," Klein argued. "California is a no-fault state. This isn't about fault for the divorce." Phoenix finally spoke. "This is about fraud, conspiracy, and breach of contract, all of which have financial penalties clearly laid out in the postnuptial agreement Mrs. Mills signed." Klein huddled with Naomi and Theo, their whispered conversation growing increasingly heated. When they turned back, Klein's professional demeanor had cracked. "What exactly are you proposing?" Phoenix slid a single sheet of paper across the table. "Mrs. Mills drops all claims to my assets, returns any gifts valued over $5,000 received during our marriage, vacates our home within 30 days, and signs a non-disclosure agreement. In exchange, she receives a one-time payment of $500,000, and I don't pursue criminal conspiracy charges against her or Mr. Lancaster." "$500,000? That's insulting," Naomi exclaimed. "It's generous, considering the circumstances," Phoenix replied evenly. "The alternative is I file criminal complaints against both of you for conspiracy to commit fraud. Mr. Lancaster loses his position at Pinnacle when they learn he was sharing confidential information. And you, Naomi, get nothing but legal bills." "You would never," Naomi began. "I've already drafted the complaints," Phoenix cut in. "They'll be filed this afternoon if we don't reach agreement today." Klein pulled Naomi and Theo back into a huddle. Their conversation lasted nearly an hour, occasionally escalating to visible arguments before Klein finally regained control. When they returned to the table, Klein's face was a mask of professional resignation. "We'll need modifications to the non-disclosure terms in 60 days to vacate the property." 45 days, Brooks countered. "And the NDA stands as written." Another hour of negotiation produced a settlement. Naomi would receive $750,000 and 45 days to vacate. In exchange, she relinquished all claims to Phoenix's assets and agreed never to discuss their marriage or divorce publicly. As they prepared to sign, Naomi looked directly at Phoenix for the first time that day. "I never thought you'd be this ruthless." Phoenix met her gaze without emotion. "You never really knew me at all." Chapter 6. System Restore. The financial press had a field day with the divorce settlement rumors. Without confirmation from either party, speculation ran rampant. Some reported Naomi had received half of Phoenix's fortune. Others claimed she'd been cut off entirely. Phoenix ignored the noise and focused on his next targets. Wes Donovan had gone suspiciously quiet since the firewall acquisition closed. According to Phoenix's sources, Wes had withdrawn from consideration for a position at Pinnacle Investments after Theo's abrupt departure from the firm. Phoenix arranged a meeting at a private club downtown. When Wes arrived, his usual confidence was visibly diminished. "I wasn't sure you'd want to see me," Wes said, settling into the leather chair across from Phoenix. "We have unfinished business." Wes nodded, eyes darting around the room. "Look, about Pinnacle." "Save it." Phoenix cut him off. "I have the recordings, the emails, everything." You conspired with Theo to manipulate the acquisition price and secure yourself a landing spot. It wasn't like that, Wes protested weakly. Theo approached me. I was just exploring options. Options that would have cost our shareholders millions and me much more personally. Wes leaned forward. What do you want, Phoenix? Money? I'll return my share from the sale. I don't want your money, Phoenix replied. I want you to understand consequences. Phoenix slid a folder across the table. Inside was a press release announcing Wes's resignation from all positions in companies where Phoenix held investments, citing ethical breaches discovered during the Quantum Lock acquisition. You can't do this, Wes whispered. It'll destroy my reputation. No one will hire me. You're right. No one will. Unless what? Unless you help me with one final task. Then you can resign quietly, keep your money, and start over somewhere far from here. Wes swallowed hard. What task? Phoenix outlined his plan for dismantling Naomi's remaining support system, including her father, Stanford Fremont, who had quietly leveraged his daughter's marriage to secure investments for his struggling real estate development company. Your choice, Wes. Help me finish this, or face the consequences of your actions. 3 days later, Wes arranged a meeting between Phoenix and Stanford Fremont at Fremont Development's offices. Stanford greeted Phoenix with the false warmth of a man who believed his daughter had secured half of a tech fortune. Phoenix, good to see you. I was just telling my partners about Quantum Lock's impressive exit. I'm sure you were, Phoenix replied coolly. Just as I'm sure you've been telling potential investors about your family connection to that exit. Stanford's smile faltered. I don't know what Naomi's told you, but Naomi's told me nothing. But your investors have been quite forthcoming. Phoenix produced documents showing that Stanford had secured $12 million in financing by implying his daughter's divorce settlement would provide guaranteed returns. Fraud by misrepresentation, Phoenix said. Securities violations. Wire fraud, potentially. Certainly enough for the SEC to take interest. Stanford collapsed into his chair. What do you want? 2 things. First, you publicly sever all business connections with Theo Lancaster, who I believe recently became an investor in your marina project. Stanford nodded shakily. Second, you stop supporting Naomi financially. No more paying her legal bills. No more subsidized condo. She's my daughter. She's a conspirator who tried to defraud me of millions, Phoenix corrected. And you leveraged her conspiracy for your own gain. By the time Phoenix left Fremont Development, he had Stanford's signed agreement to his terms, plus a promissory note for the $200,000 Stanford had contributed to Naomi's legal fund. That evening, as Phoenix sat in his new downtown penthouse reviewing documentation of his systematic dismantling of Naomi's world, his personal phone rang. The screen showed Naomi's number. He considered letting it go to voicemail, but answered on the final ring. Yes. How could you? Naomi's voice was raw with emotion. My father? Really? Your father made his own choices. He's going to lose everything. Like you planned for me to lose everything? Phoenix countered. It wasn't supposed to be like this, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. You weren't supposed to find out until after. That didn't make it right, Naomi. A long pause followed. What if I told you I made a mistake? That I regret what I did? Phoenix closed his eyes, momentarily allowing himself to remember when he had loved this woman. I'd say you regret getting caught, not what you did. Phoenix, please. I have nowhere to go. Theo's gone. Daddy's cut me off. Even my friends won't return my calls since the rumors started. Rumors I've kept contained out of respect for what we once had, Phoenix replied. That was my concession. Can we meet? Just talk? There's still something between us. I know you feel it too. For a moment, Phoenix wondered if she was right. If beneath his calculated vengeance, some ember of feeling remained. No, he said finally. There's nothing left to discuss. Goodbye, Naomi. He ended the call and returned to his work, ignoring the hollow feeling in his chest. Chapter 7. Digital Aftershocks. 3 months after the divorce settlement, Phoenix had successfully reinvented himself. He launched a new venture called Axiom Analytics, focused on behavioral prediction algorithms derived from Quantum Lock's technology, but applied to financial markets instead of security. The company attracted immediate attention. Phoenix's reputation as a brilliant but ruthless businessman, enhanced rather than damaged by the divorce rumors, drew both investors and talent. On a rare evening when Phoenix left the office before midnight, he found Audra Voss, a data scientist he'd recently hired, still working. "The Korean market analysis can wait until morning," he said, stopping by her desk. Audra looked up, pushing her glasses back into place. "Just trying to impress the boss." "Consider me impressed. But I prefer sustainable work habits over burnout." As they walked to the elevator together, Audra hesitated. "A few of us are grabbing drinks at Keystone. You're welcome to join." Phoenix's instinct was to decline. He'd kept his personal and professional lives strictly separated since the divorce. But something about Audra's straightforward manner appealed to him. "One drink," he agreed. At the bar, Phoenix observed his team interacting off the clock, their dynamics, their unguarded conversations. He'd forgotten what it was like to be around people without calculating their motives. Audra slid into the seat beside him. "So, the rumors are wrong." "Which rumors?" Phoenix asked, raising an eyebrow. "That you're actually an AI program designed to look human." Phoenix surprised himself by laughing. "My code would be more efficient." "Seriously, though," Audra continued, "you should do this more often. The team respects you, but they're also terrified of you. Maybe that's by design." Audra studied him. "Is it because the guy who noticed I was working too late and encouraged me to maintain sustainable work habits doesn't seem like someone who wants his team terrified?" Before Phoenix could respond, his phone buzzed with a news alert. Pinnacle Investments under SEC investigation for insider trading. He excused himself to make a call, stepping outside the bar. "Is this your doing?" asked the voice that answered. "Hello to you too, Brooks," Phoenix replied. "The Pinnacle investigation. Did you trigger it?" "No, but I'm not surprised. Theo Lancaster made enemies besides me." After finishing the call, Phoenix returned to find the team deeply engaged in a technical debate about algorithm optimization. For the first time in months, he allowed himself to simply engage with the work he loved without ulterior motives. When Phoenix arrived home that night, his security system alerted him to a package delivered by courier. Inside was a thumb drive and a note in familiar handwriting: "Insurance policy. In case you're ever tempted to finish what you started." Phoenix ran the drive through multiple security scans before viewing its contents. It contained videos of him and Naomi in intimate moments from early in their marriage, plus recordings of business conversations where Phoenix discussed aggressive, though legal, tactics. He recognized Naomi's message: mutually assured destruction if he continued his vendetta. The next morning, Phoenix received another unexpected communication: an email from Stanford Fremont requesting a meeting. They met at Stanford's club, a once prestigious establishment, now showing signs of faded glory, much like Stanford himself. "I'm selling the development company," Stanford announced without preamble. "The Marina project is dead after Theo pulled his funding." "That's not my concern," Phoenix replied. "It should be. The land parcel borders the site where you're planning Axiom's new headquarters." Phoenix hadn't publicly announced the headquarters location. The fact that Stanford knew indicated he still had connections worth considering. "What are you proposing?" "A trade. I have information about who else was involved in Naomi and Theo's scheme. In exchange, you help me exit my company with dignity." Phoenix studied the older man. "Why would you betray your own daughter?" Stanford's face hardened. "Naomi betrayed me first. She promised her settlement would save my company. Instead, she got nothing and left me exposed." "What information do you have?" "Names, dates, details about who helped them plan, who was supposed to benefit, including someone at Axiom you trust." Phoenix felt a cold certainty settle in his stomach. "Ooh, that information costs $2 million. Enough for me to retire quietly." Phoenix stood. "Keep your information, Stanford. Unlike your daughter, I know who I can trust." As Phoenix left, Stanford called after him. "You think this is over? Naomi's not done with you. She'll never be done with you." That evening, Phoenix reviewed personnel files for everyone he'd brought from Quantum Lock to Axiom. One name connected to both Wes and Naomi stood out: Dominic Reed, his head of product development. Rather than confronting Dominic immediately, Phoenix set a trap. He called a leadership meeting and announced a radical shift in Axiom's business model, one that would make certain proprietary algorithms even more valuable. "This stays in this room," Phoenix emphasized. "The market shift won't be announced for 6 weeks." Within 24 hours, Phoenix's monitoring system flagged unusual activity in Dominic's communications. A text to an unknown number. Strategy changing. Need to meet. Phoenix traced the number to Theo Lancaster. When confronted with the evidence, Dominic crumbled immediately. "They approached me a year ago. Said I'd get a leadership role after the acquisition. I just passed along information. I never meant to hurt you personally." "But you did," Phoenix said quietly. Everyone seems to think they can compartmentalize betrayal. Dominic was escorted from the building within the hour, his access revoked, his career in the industry effectively ended. That night, alone in his penthouse, Phoenix realized the betrayals might never end. For every conspirator he uncovered, another connection emerged. The web extended further than he'd imagined. He opened his laptop and created a new algorithm, one designed to predict betrayal based on communication patterns, financial movements, and relationship mapping. By morning, he had the framework for Axiom's most powerful product yet. Phoenix named it Cassandra, after the mythological figure cursed to speak truths no one would believe. Chapter 8. Recursive Function. 6 months later, Axiom Analytics had become a sensation in the financial technology sector. Their predictive algorithms were uncannily accurate, allowing clients to anticipate market shifts before they occurred. What no one knew was that Phoenix had deployed a modified version of Cassandra to monitor everyone in his professional and personal orbit. The algorithm alerted him to potential betrayals before they materialized, shifts in communication patterns, unusual financial transactions, unexpected connections between parties. Phoenix had used these insights to quietly neutralize 3 potential threats within Axiom and 2 outside the company. Each time, he moved with surgical precision, ensuring the targeted individual never connected their downfall to him. One Tuesday morning, Phoenix's assistant interrupted his workflow. "Mr. Mills, there's someone here to see you. She doesn't have an appointment, but insists it's important. A Ms. Merritt." Phoenix hadn't seen the private investigator since the divorce. He approved the visit. Merritt looked exactly as he remembered, efficiently dressed, perpetually alert, with eyes that missed nothing. "Your security is impressive," she noted, taking the seat he offered. 3 layers of authentication just to reach your office. "What can I do for you, Merritt? I thought you might want to know that Theodore Lancaster was found dead in his apartment last night. Apparent suicide." Phoenix showed no reaction. "I'm sorry to hear that. Are you?" "Because Theo's death is the 3rd connected to your ex-wife in recent months. First, her friend Olivia overdosed after losing her design firm, a firm that failed when several major clients suddenly canceled contracts. Then Wesley Donovan drove his car off a cliff after being blacklisted from every financial institution in the country. Tragic coincidences," Phoenix said evenly. "Maybe. Or maybe someone created an algorithm that could systematically destroy lives by targeting precisely what matters most to each individual." Phoenix leaned back. "That sounds far-fetched. Does it? I know what Axiom really does, Phoenix. You're not just predicting markets. You're predicting people. Their breaking points. Their vulnerabilities. Why are you here, Merritt?" She placed a flash drive on his desk. "Because Naomi hired me 6 weeks ago to investigate you. She's planning something significant, something that could undo everything you've built." Phoenix made no move toward the drive. "Why betray your client?" "Because I don't work for people who leave bodies in their wake. Whatever game you and Naomi are playing has gone too far." After Merritt left, Phoenix had the flash drive thoroughly scanned before reviewing its contents. It contained detailed surveillance of his activities, personal and professional, plus a disturbing discovery. Naomi had recently met with Lisa Mills, Phoenix's estranged mother, whom he hadn't spoken to in 15 years. Phoenix immediately activated Cassandra's highest security protocols, searching for any digital connection between Naomi and his mother. The algorithm found none, which was significant in itself. Whatever they were planning, they were keeping it completely offline. That evening, Phoenix visited his mother's small apartment in the city's eastern district. She opened the door with a look of unsurprised resignation. "I figured you'd show up eventually," Lisa said, stepping aside to let him enter. The apartment was modest but meticulously kept, much like the childhood home Phoenix had grown up in before his father's gambling debts forced them to downsize repeatedly. "Why did you meet with my ex-wife?" Phoenix asked without preamble. Lisa sighed, settling into a worn armchair. "She found me. Said she wanted to understand you better." "And you believe that?" "No. I believed she wanted revenge, and thought I might help her get it." Lisa met his gaze directly. "I told her I hadn't been part of your life for years." "What did she offer you?" "Money at first. When that didn't work, she suggested she could help reconnect us. Said you were lonely, isolated." Lisa's expression softened momentarily. "Are you Phoenix?" "I'm exactly where I want to be." "Are you?" "Because the boy I raised wanted to create something meaningful, not destroy lives." Phoenix felt an unexpected flash of anger. The boy you raised watched his father gamble away their security, then watched his mother choose that same father over her son's well-being. "Forgive me if I learned the wrong lessons about trust." Lisa flinched. "I deserve that. But Phoenix, this path you're on, using your brilliant mind to systematically ruin people, it's not sustainable. Sooner or later, it will consume you too." "Did you tell Naomi anything she could use against me?" "No, but I did tell her something true, that you're still punishing everyone around you for what your father and I did." Phoenix stood. "If Naomi contacts you again, let me know immediately." As he turned to leave, Lisa spoke again. "She mentioned someone named Audra. Said that would be your breaking point." Phoenix froze, his hand on the doorknob. "When did she say this?" "Last week. She seemed very certain about it." Phoenix left without another word, his mind racing. He hadn't told anyone about his growing feelings for Audra, feelings he'd barely acknowledged to himself. Yet somehow, Naomi had identified his one new vulnerability. He called Audra immediately, but her phone went straight to voicemail. Phoenix diverted to Axiom's offices, finding the building largely empty except for security and a few late workers. Audra wasn't among them. Using Axiom security systems, Phoenix traced Audra's access card. She had left the building at 6:47 p.m. but hadn't checked into her apartment building, something Cassandra noted as a significant deviation from her usual pattern. At 11:23 p.m., Phoenix's phone rang with an unknown number. "If you want to see her again, come alone to the Quantum Lock server room. 1 hour. No police, no security." Naomi's voice was eerily calm. "If you've heard her, this isn't about her, Phoenix. It's about finishing what we started." Phoenix arrived at the old Quantum Lock building 45 minutes later. The facility had been largely emptied after the acquisition, with only minimal security maintained for the remaining servers. Phoenix used his still-active credentials to enter the server room. The space was dimly lit by the blinking LEDs of half-empty server racks. In the center stood Naomi, looking both diminished and dangerous. "Where is she?" Phoenix demanded. "Safe. For now." Naomi gestured to a laptop showing a live feed of Audra in what appeared to be a storage room, bound to a chair but unharmed. "She's in this building, but you won't find her without my help." "What do you want?" "First, confirmation. Did you cause Theo's suicide?" Phoenix's expression remained neutral. "Theo made his own choices." "Like you engineered those choices? Like you systematically destroyed everything he cared about until death seemed preferable?" "I never touched him," Phoenix said truthfully. "Cassandra simply predicted his vulnerabilities. The market did the rest." "Cassandra." Naomi's laugh was bitter. "Of course you'd name your weapon after a woman no one believed. Is that how you see yourself, Phoenix? The truth teller everyone ignores." "Why am I here, Naomi?" She stepped closer. "To end this. You've taken everything from me. My lifestyle, my reputation, my future. Even Theo. I want the same opportunity. You want to destroy me?" Phoenix raised an eyebrow. "You already tried that." "No. I tried to take what you built. Now I want to erase you." Naomi pointed to the laptop. "I have a choice for you. Option 1. You transfer $30 million to an offshore account I prepared, and you permanently shut down Cassandra. I release Audra, and we never see each other again. And option 2, I send evidence of Cassandra's actual purpose to the SEC, FBI, and every news outlet in the country. Your algorithm didn't just predict behaviors. It manipulated markets and people. That security's fraud, racketeering, and possibly accessory to multiple deaths. Phoenix's mind raced, calculating possibilities. You're bluffing. You don't have evidence of Cassandra's operations. Don't I? Naomi tapped a key, bringing up documents on the screen. Dominic Reed kept very detailed records before you fired him. Enough to prove what Cassandra really does. Phoenix recognized the documents, internal specifications he'd shared with only his most trusted team members. Even if what you're saying is true, Phoenix said carefully, releasing this information implicates you as well. You were married to me when Quantum Lock developed the core technology. I'm already ruined, Phoenix. What's a few years in prison compared to watching you lose everything? Naomi's smile was chilling. Besides, I've structured the evidence to cast me as the whistleblower who discovered your crimes. Between that and my cooperation, I'll likely avoid serious consequences. Phoenix glanced at the screen showing Audra, then back to Naomi. You've thought this through. I learned from the best. Now decide. Phoenix appeared to consider his options, his expression unreadable. Release Audra first. Then I'll transfer the money. That's not how this works, Naomi snapped. Money first. Then I text the location. How do I know you'll follow through? You don't. That's the point, Phoenix. To feel what I felt, completely at someone else's mercy. Phoenix reached slowly into his pocket, producing his phone. $30 million. Where do you want it sent? As Naomi provided the account details, Phoenix appeared to comply, his fingers moving efficiently across the screen. It's done. Naomi checked her own phone, her expression shifting from triumph to confusion. There's no confirmation. What did you do? Phoenix slipped his phone back into his pocket, triggered a different protocol, one I created specifically for you. The server room doors opened, and Audra walked in, unbound, unharmed, and flanked by 2 FBI agents. Naomi Fremont Mills, one agent began, you're under arrest for kidnapping, extortion, conspiracy to commit fraud, and making terrorist threats. Naomi's face contorted with rage. This is a setup. He's the criminal. Ask her. She pointed at Audra. Tell them how he forced you here. Audra stepped forward. Ms. Fremont approached me 2 weeks ago, claiming to be a journalist investigating ethical breaches at Axiom. She gained my trust, then drugged me at dinner tonight. Everything that happened here was recorded as part of an ongoing federal investigation. As the agents led Naomi away, she screamed back at Phoenix. This isn't over. You think you've won, but you've lost everything that matters. You're alone, Phoenix. You'll always be alone. When the room had cleared, Phoenix turned to Audra. Are you really all right? I'm fine, she assured him. Though I wish you'd told me your ex-wife was potentially dangerous before I agreed to this operation. I'm sorry for putting you at risk. Well, my mother told me Naomi had mentioned you. Phoenix's usual composure faltered. I couldn't let her hurt you. Audra studied him. The FBI agent said you've been working with him for months, that you predicted Naomi would eventually escalate to something like this. Cassandra predicted it. Phoenix corrected. I just confirmed the pattern. And is Cassandra what she said? A weapon. Phoenix considered his answer carefully. Cassandra is a prediction algorithm. It can identify patterns of behavior that might lead to certain outcomes. What people do with those predictions is their choice. Audra nodded slowly. Like you chose to use those predictions to systematically dismantle your ex-wife's life and everyone who helped her. Phoenix met her gaze without flinching. Yes, that's terrifying, Audra said, and also oddly principled in a ruthless sort of way. Does it change how you see me? Of course it does, but not necessarily in the way you think. As they left the building together, Phoenix felt an unfamiliar sensation, not the cold satisfaction of executed vengeance, but something warmer and far more dangerous. Hope. Chapter 9. New Variables. 1 year later, Phoenix stood in his office at Axiom Analytics' new headquarters, looking out over the city. The company had grown exponentially, with Cassandra's predictive capabilities refined and refocused exclusively on market analysis, at least officially. Privately, Phoenix maintained a separate version that continued to monitor potential threats, though he had modified its parameters to flag rather than actively neutralize. The events with Naomi had taught him that some threats required human judgment, not algorithmic determination. A knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. "The board is assembled," his assistant announced. In the boardroom, Phoenix took his place at the head of the table. The quarterly meeting proceeded efficiently until they reached the final agenda item, the proposed merger with Horizon Data. "The synergies are clear," the Horizon CEO explained. "Our data collection capabilities, combined with your predictive algorithms, would create an unbeatable market advantage." Phoenix listened impassively as the presentation continued. When it concluded, he thanked the Horizon team and asked them to wait outside while the Axiom board deliberated. Once alone, Phoenix addressed his board directly. "3 months ago, I asked Cassandra to analyze Horizon's proposal. The algorithm identified concerning patterns. He distributed a confidential report detailing how Horizon had systematically approached former Quantum Lock employees, including Wes Donovan before his death and Dominic Reed afterward. Their acquisition strategy had been developed with specific insight into Axiom's technology, insight that could only have come from within. They're not looking for a merger," Phoenix concluded. "They're attempting a hostile takeover by subterfuge." The board erupted in questions and concerns. Phoenix let them vent before continuing. "I prepared 2 responses. Option 1. We decline the merger, but leak enough proprietary information to lead them down a development path that will ultimately fail. Option 2. We accept, but with specific contingencies that give us control of the combined entity." "Those both sound aggressive," noted Audra, who had joined the board 6 months earlier. "They try to steal what we built," Phoenix replied. "Aggression is warranted." The board vote was split until Audra proposed a third option: transparency. Confront Horizon with the evidence, demand accountability from those involved, but proceed with negotiations if their leadership made appropriate changes. Phoenix watched her as she made her case. Logical, ethical, yet still protecting Axiom's interests. It was a perspective he wouldn't have considered a year ago. "We'll take Ms. Voss's approach under advisement," Phoenix announced, surprising everyone. "Let's reconvene tomorrow for the final decision." That evening, Phoenix invited Audra to dinner at his penthouse, a rare occurrence despite their evolving personal relationship. Their connection remained primarily professional, with carefully maintained boundaries Phoenix was reluctant to cross. As they ate on his terrace, overlooking the city lights, Audra broached the subject directly. "You didn't really bring me here to discuss the Horizon situation, did you?" Phoenix set down his glass. "Not entirely, no." "Then why?" "Naomi's parole hearing is next week," he said. "The FBI believes she'll be released." Audra tensed visibly. "Is that a threat? To you?" "To us." Cassandra calculated a 72% probability that she'll attempt some form of retaliation. "And you're preparing countermeasures," Audra stated rather than asked. "More destruction." Phoenix was silent for a moment. That would be the logical response, based on previous patterns. But I'm considering variables the algorithm can't quantify." Audra leaned forward. Such as the cost of perpetuating this cycle. The resources diverted from building to destroying. He hesitated. "Personal consequences." Phoenix Mills considering personal consequences? Audra's smile was gentle but surprised. "That's new. I find myself calculating different values lately." Audra reached across the table, her hand covering his. "That's growth. Or maybe just humanity asserting itself over your programming." The next morning, Phoenix made 2 unexpected decisions. First, he called the Horizon CEO directly, laid out what Axiom had discovered, and offered a path forward that required accountability but preserved the potential partnership. Second, he asked his attorneys to draft a letter to the parole board regarding Naomi. Instead of opposing her release, the letter stated that Phoenix had no objection to her parole, provided she maintained distance from him and his associates. When Brooks called to confirm, his disbelief was evident. You're not opposing her release? After everything she did, she served her time for the kidnapping and extortion, Phoenix replied. The rest is between us. And if she comes after you again, then I'll respond appropriately. Later that week, Phoenix received an unexpected visitor at Axiom, his mother, Lisa. She hadn't been to his office before, and her presence in the ultramodern space seemed incongruous. I heard Naomi's being released, Lisa said once they were alone in his office. Are you concerned? I'm prepared, Phoenix answered. But that's not why you're here. Lisa smiled faintly. No, I came because of something Audra said when we had coffee last month. Phoenix raised an eyebrow. You and Audra have coffee? Monthly. She's quite remarkable. Lisa paused. She said you were changing, that you were finding balance between protection and connection, and you wanted to see for yourself. Lisa nodded. I also wanted to give you this. She placed a worn journal on his desk. Your father's. He kept it during his last years, after you cut contact. He never sent it because he respected your boundaries, even as they broke his heart. Phoenix made no move to touch the journal. He had 15 years to make amends. Yes, and you've had 1 year to decide what kind of man you want to be after Naomi. A man who destroys what threatens him, or a man who builds something too strong to be threatened. After Lisa left, Phoenix sat alone, the journal untouched on his desk. Eventually, he opened his laptop and accessed Cassandra's interface. The algorithm had flagged several potential threats, including Naomi's upcoming release and 3 business competitors making concerning moves. In the past, Phoenix would have initiated countermeasures immediately. Now, he closed the laptop without taking action. That evening, he called Audra. The Horizon deal is proceeding with the modifications you suggested. I heard. The board is impressed. And you? I'm cautiously optimistic, she replied. What about Naomi's parole? I'm not opposing it. A pause. That's surprising. I'm trying something new, Phoenix said. Calculated risk without preemptive strikes. Bold strategy for someone with your history. I have excellent risk assessment tools. Audra's laugh was warm. The algorithm, or something else? Both, Phoenix admitted. Cassandra provides the data, but I'm finding other factors equally valuable, such as Phoenix thought of his mother's visit, the unopened journal, the future he might build instead of the past he couldn't change. Perspective, he said finally, and maybe the understanding that some calculations require human input. 3 days later, Phoenix received notification that Naomi had been granted parole. That same afternoon, Horizon Data signed the modified merger agreement, creating one of the most powerful predictive analytics companies in the world. Phoenix marked both events by